Day like this, yeah, I've been dreaming of a day like this for a number of years. Ever since I first started in recovery, and this means a lot to me, man. And it's all because of God.
Amen.
I mean, my name is Jesse. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, finding victory over a number of things. Um, I was a hot mess, and now I'm a work in progress. Um, Starting out, this is something I wrote a few months back. I was cutting grass, and I had this overwhelming gratitude that just brought me to tears. And I got off the lawnmower and I ran inside, and I wrote this down. It says, "Light shining in the darkness, the voice crying in the wilderness. I love you more than you could ever understand. I'm knocking on the door of your heart. Let me in. I can save you. I can save you from yourself. I can break the chains that bind you." And I'm going to talk some about my life building up to the point where things started to change. I wrote down about 8 pages, and then I'm going to speak from memory. Hopefully, speaking from memory, there'll be more emotion involved. Um, how is a child to know his life is out of the ordinary when all he knows of life is so small? As a man looking backwards, I can see my life more clearly. There was a lot of things in my childhood I don't like to dwell on. I don't believe a child should be looking at pornography and having sexual experiences. The Bible says to honor your mother and father, but what is a child to do when his parents are leading him in the wrong direction? I was born in DeKalb County, February 22nd, 1984. I lived in Tucker, Georgia till I was about 7. I didn't find out until later in life why we had moved, which plays out in my story. I was a very skinny kid until I was in 3rd grade and became overweight. I'm not sure why I started overeating, but it was the beginning of a struggle with food and weight. In 4th grade, I found out I was able to throw up on command without putting my finger down my throat. I used it to get out of school a lot, but it became a 20-year struggle with bulimia. I'm not sure why, but in 6th grade, I took a safety pin and stabbed it in my arm till it scratched the bone. The attention I got was the beginning of an almost 2-decade struggle with self-harm that through the years progressed to the point it was considered self-mutilation. To my knowledge, I've had 300 staples and 153 stitches, all from self-mutilation. I really hated middle school. I failed every grade, even failed 7th grade twice. It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough. I was just miserable and didn't care. 5th grade, they wanted to put me in gifted class, but I already felt like I was an outcast. I smoked weed for the first time in middle school, but cared nothing about it. When I got to high school, things got a little better. I started making A's. I was still a very angry person. I listened to a lot of angry music and constantly fantasized about violence. I started to be more interested in the opposite sex, but all I got was rejection, which greatly affected me. I had a complete lack of love. I tried weed again and loved it. The thing I could always steal weed from my mother. Somewhere around that time, I got drunk for the first time. My father had partied with the neighbors. He left a bottle of tequila. The neighbor asked me to take it home and didn't make it. I drank alcoholically the very first time. I downed all of it in a short period of time and lost my mind. I punched every window out of an abandoned house and put candles out on my face. This is important for how my life became later in life. And around 11th grade, I got taken to the therapist for the first time. I was getting high regularly. I was starving myself often, cutting myself, hiding jugs of vomit. The therapist asked me, did I ever think of suicide? I was honest. I told him I thought of killing myself every day of my life. They sent me to the mental institution. I loved it there. I fit in, and there was a few girls that liked me. I didn't want to leave. My parents came. I was honest with my dad. I was always afraid of him because he was a violent alcoholic. I told him, you don't even feel like my father. You're never there for me. My parents were always busy working and partying. I got released and just went back to not caring. Soon after, I attempted suicide for the first time. I took some nitroglycerin pills and some other heart medicine. I made a phone call to my friend to tell him goodbye, that I was going to die. I was going to be dead soon. I hung up the phone and laid down, waiting for the end. Luckily, he called back and talked to my parents. I was in ICU like a week, and back to the mental hospital I stayed 2 weeks. Got out and went back to not caring. My buddy introduced me to this cold medicine that would get you extremely high when taken in high doses. I abused it for 3 months because I could just steal a whole bunch of it. I never ate and I was always so high I could barely walk. I lost 90 pounds. I was high on it for my graduation pictures. It seemed I was always infatuated with these girls, never cared anything for me but the fact I drove and always had drugs. My sister had given me a pocket knife. I was supposed to take LSD with this girl I liked, and my parents told me no. I left my house walking. Not far down the road, I lost it and used that knife to cut my own throat. I had 3 huge gashes in my neck. Yeah, I had 33 stitches in my neck. I was bleeding a lot. I went back home and saw myself in the mirror. I could see my own esophagus. My father said, "You wussy." He used a different word. He said, "You wussy, you should have done a better job." For some reason, it didn't affect me that I had cut my own throat, but the words my father had said to me greatly affected me. Back to the mental hospital. I got out, and the principal wouldn't let me come to school because I might scare the other kids. The counselor got me dual enrolled, so I went to college instead of high school. In the middle of my semester of college, my mother went to pick my father up from the bar. She never came home again. They stopped at the gas station at 53 and 29, and when they were pulling out, my mother hit the curb. Her door opened and she fell into traffic, getting run over by 3 cars. It was a closed casket. My home life went from bad to worse. I went from caring little to not caring at all. I made it through my semester of college. I missed a lot of days. I got a letter saying all I had to do was write an essay and I could stay in school. But I didn't care enough to write the essay. I started doing more drugs. I started selling drugs so I could stay high every waking moment of my life. I was a dealer about 18 months before I got strung out, blacked out, and had an accident. I had over an ounce of weed in the car and I had a bunch of Xanax. I ate all the Xanax so I wouldn't get a charge for them. I have a very vague memory of the few days I was in jail. I ended up on felony probation for 4 years. I could no longer get high because I had to take drug tests. I struggled with drugs. My mental health issues got me out of trouble a couple times. I turned to the bottle and quickly became an alcoholic. I got in a relationship with a woman 14 years older than me. My alcoholism was progressively getting worse. I cared less and less about the relationship and more about drinking with my friend. The significance of that relationship is I had a high standard when it come to the opposite sex and I was saving myself. I was a virgin until I was 20 years old. But when it came to drugs and alcohol, I had low morals because of the way I was raised. At the same point crossed the line and my drinking was bad enough, I would drink myself into a mild coma and urinate all over myself. The relationship ended and I got straight in another relationship where my drinking was more acceptable. I was continually losing my mind and cutting myself. I, on a number of occasions, would start drinking, go crazy, wake up in the emergency room strapped to a bed. I caught numerous charges, the worst aggravated assault, family violence. I got in a fight with my father and nearly beat him to death. I got put in a program called mental health court. I got a little better but could not maintain for more than a couple months. And that's where the writing ends. While I was in mental health court, it was like I was trying to find every way to get through these loopholes so I can continue using without facing the consequences. And it seemed all the struggles like I would get some time, but then I would fall on my face. And it came to the point where one night I had got married, and I told my wife, I'm gonna drink today. I woke up saying I was gonna drink, and I did that very thing. And it didn't go good. I got super intoxicated. I threw a beer bottle across my father's house, and it hit a picture of my brother and his daughter. And my brother was there, and he flipped on me, and I flipped, and my dad flipped, and my dad pulled a gun. He was going to shoot me. The gun went off, and I went straight to blackout. Luckily, I didn't get shot, but apparently my sister came to get me, and I tried to jump out of a moving vehicle. And they took me to the emergency room, but Barrow County was so tired of seeing me, they wouldn't accept me into the emergency room because they were so used for me, losing my mind and coming up there and getting stapled up and sent off to the mental institution. I had been to the mental institution 21 times. And I went to the mental institution, and while I was there, treatment court said, either you go to rehab or you go to prison. I said, well, I guess I'm going to rehab. And I got to rehab, and it was so hard for me because I was always with my family. Even though I was wild and crazy and completely mentally unstable, my family was always there for me. And it was so difficult. And I'd only been married like 6 months. And I remember I was in this treatment, and I had gotten an argument with my wife. And of course, always when I struggle, I go straight to wanting to kill myself. And I remember I got in an argument with her, and I slammed the phone, and I went back in my room, and I laid down and I cried. And I was in a fetal position. I was like, God, if things don't get better, I'm going to wake up in the morning, check out a razor, slit my wrist, and bleed to death in the shower. And I cried myself to sleep. And when I woke up, things were different. And it was like, all of a sudden I was teachable. And I went through the inpatient. I made it to the outpatient. And while I was in inpatient, I decided as soon as I get to outpatient, where you could get an apartment and you could go to the store and everything, that I was going to lift weights. And I started lifting weights, and I started feeling like I was getting somewhere. The thing was, I was getting all this praise from all these people, and I was losing all this weight. And even my counselor gave me praise. But all this praise was building an ego. And this ego was just killing me. And I remember they told me, Jesse, do not get in a relationship. And I was addicted to sex before I even started having sex. It controlled my mind. I was like, I'm not going without it. And I ended up committing adultery while I was in the rehab. And I made it 10 and a half months, which was a big deal because before I could only make it, 90 days. So it was huge that I made it. And I remember I was supposed to go back on Thanksgiving break to spend time with my family. And then the girl that I was seeing, ended up, she was an alcoholic. And I didn't think nothing of it. I was like, you know what? I'm stronger than this. It's not going to affect me. But it did affect me. And I remember it upset me because she had drank when she was supposed to come see me. And it was like I went from good to flipping out in just a moment. And I was supposed to pay for this divorce. I had like $400 in my pocket. And I just got my book bag, and I put it on, and I walked out of the apartment, and I went straight to the store and bought a bunch of beer. And I got some razors, and it was like, I grabbed the beer, and I was like, this is 10 and a half months down the drain. And I slammed the beer, and then I cut myself on my right forearm. And I was like, you know what? This isn't good enough. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it big, because I'd always been an all or nothing kind of person. So I slashed the razor across my left forearm, and it lacerated a vein. And I just didn't care. And I was afraid of going to prison. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going all the way. And some people were looking for me, and they're like, Jesse, what are you doing? And I told them what was going on. And I ended up hiding in the woods for a while, and my counselor called me. He's like, you know, your probation doesn't have to know about this. You don't have to go to prison, man. Just get some help. And I was like, I'm not going to get help, man. I'm just so tired of this. And I ended up roaming the streets. I didn't know where I was at, and I was just looking for drugs. And I was just asking random strangers, you know, do you know where to get me some drugs? Can you get me some drugs, man? I'll give you some money. But this whole time, I'm bleeding like crazy. And I ended up running into this dude. And I was like, if you can give me some drugs, man, I'll give you some money. And I ended up in this crack house. And I was in this crack house, smoking crack, bleeding to death, going, there's a better way than this. And I was like, you know what, after bleeding for like 5 hours, I was like, I'm going to get some help. But I had walked so far, I didn't know where I was at. And I just found this church, and I called 911, and I was like, I'm at this church. You know, I've been bleeding for 5 hours. I'm extremely high. I need some help. And a cop came and got me, and it was a cop that I'd been seeing at the gym, man. He was like, you were doing so good. And he's like, what happened? And I was like, dude, I just lost it, man. And they took me and they put me in a mental institution like 100 miles away, which scared me, because I was court-ordered to this rehab, and the rehab was for mental illness and drug addiction, and they had their own mental hospital. So I was afraid, because I was all 100 miles away. And I remember it was Thanksgiving, and I was in this mental hospital, and I just couldn't keep it together. And I ended up getting out, and I had to start the rehab all over again. And I remember I was back in inpatient. I made it through the intense part, and then I was in the middle part, and they were interviewing me. They were interviewing me to go back to the outpatient. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I was like, I do not want to be in rehab anymore. If this is what I got to do, I'd rather be dead. And then because I said that, they put me back in the mental institution. And I stayed there for like 23 days. And they called my probation. There's nothing else we can do. Because he won't go back through the outpatient, we got to send him back home. And luckily, they said, you can come home. And I was so happy. But I was already waiting, because I was waiting for March 9th was when I was supposed to be done with mental health court. And I did all this stuff, and I was exercising, and I was losing weight, but I was just biding my time till March 9th got here so I could get back to getting high. And it was March 9th, 12:01. I called my buddy. I said, I'm done, man. I'm getting some beers. And I thought I was missing out on my old life when there was nothing there worth keeping. And I relapsed. I had planned it, and it was horrible. And then I didn't think I was going to have to do any more drug tests. And mental health court said, you had to come to the graduation. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And once again, I flipped out. I was like, that's it. I'm just going to die. I went to the store and bought 2 pints of Jack Daniels. And I bought a bag of shaving razors, because that was my weapon. I would bust the blade out of the razor, and that's what I would use to cut myself. And I was like, you know what? This is it. This is the end. I went back in the middle of the woods. I started chugging whiskey. And then I went over to my mother's grave, because I didn't realize how significant my mother's death was, because my mother was always there to protect me. And it was like when she was gone and everything got bad, and it was like all this hopelessness and helplessness, and I was sitting on her gravestone, getting smashed. And some people were at a nearby gravesite visiting one of their dead loved ones. And someone told me to go talk to these people. And I was like, I know this is crazy, but I'm here drunk and I'm planning on killing myself. And they were like, don't do it. Just don't do it. Things will get better. And they were talking about Jesus. And I gave them my razors. And I ended up going back to the mental institution. And I thought, everything's going to be okay. I was in the mental institution for 5 days. I got out. I had to visit probation. And I ended up relapsing again. And it was like, they said, Jesse, we cannot keep giving you chance after chance. And I was like, can I go back to rehab? And she locked me up. She put me in the county. And because of my charges was aggravated assault, I was in high max, which scared me. Because I always considered myself a tough guy, But really I was just weak and I was just fragile, and I was always using my anger and my stuff to push people away, because if they got close to me and they knew me, then they could use it to hurt me. And I was so scared. And I remember I was crying in the shower and I was eating like crazy and I was throwing up. And I remember there was a guard, he was talking about God. And I talked to him because what he was saying made sense. And I was like, I always believed in God. But it seems this God thing just doesn't work for me. And he was like, just go in your cell and get on your knees and pray for God to reveal himself and pray for understanding. And that's exactly what I did. I got in my cell and I got on my knees and I prayed, God, just show yourself to me. Just help me to understand. And I was fighting going to RSAT because I heard so many horrible things about it. And they said I could go back to rehab. But they kept me in the county jail for so long that the rehab wouldn't take me anymore because I had too much clean time. And I remember I was so angry and I was struggling to read the Bible. And I was about to throw the Bible out of the jail cell when I just stopped. And I said, God, if this is where you want me to go, then just help me to learn whatever it is you want me to learn. And I was in there for 3.5 months. And finally, they shipped me to RSAT. And I was so scared because I was with all these people, and it seemed like everybody was a tough guy. And I was like, I don't want to be a tough guy anymore. I just want to be okay. And they called church call, and I said, you know what? I'm going to church. I went to church, and a preacher, he was talking about salvation. And what gets me is I had grew up in church, and I had always considered myself a Christian. And I had went through the prayer of salvation when I was like 6 years old. But I didn't never feel saved. And he was telling me about proof of salvation, a change of heart, a renewing of the mind. And I remember I was standing there and I was praying, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the things I've done. Just help me to be a better person. And it was like in an instant, I was changed. And they were like, if you sign up, you can get a Bible. And I signed up as fast as I could. And I started reading the Bible, but it was so hard for me because the message was so powerful, I could only read a few pages at a time. And it was like once I would read, it was like I was getting hungry for it. And I quit overeating and I started exercising. And I got up to where I was doing like 20 miles a day. And then it was like all this scripture was making sense. And things were coming to my mind that I hadn't read in the Bible that later on I found in the Bible. And I remember I was I was like, what's going on with me? I couldn't watch the same TV anymore. It affected me. I couldn't watch the violence. And I hated being surrounded by all this negativity. And it was like, God, just protect me. And I remember when I went in, I was like, 9 months is forever. And it was like, once I got saved, I was like, I only got 9 months. I got to get myself together. And I just kept going. And it was like, every Monday, I would speak about myself, about my life, what it seemed God was doing. He was changing me. I was like, this is like magic. I was like, I'm different. And I was just sharing and sharing. And this dude was like, Jesse, you could help so many people. And I was like, I want that. I want to help some people. And they were like, you could be a preacher. You could be a motivational speaker. I was like, I don't care. I just want to be okay. And I just kept going and going. And I remember I was so focused. And I remember when I had written this preacher, and I was like, it feels like God is consuming me. And later on, I read in the Bible, it said that you inherit an unshakable kingdom, and God is a consuming fire. And finally, my release came. And that day, I found out my father had throat cancer. But it didn't affect me. I just prayed for him. And it was like, I just kept going and I kept going. And I remember I'd always been going to a different recovery group. And I was so excited to go there and tell them what God had done for me. And that's exactly what I did. And it was like some of the people I used to look up to put me on blast and tried to tear me down and act like I was crazy. And it was like the people I looked to, I was like, they were leading me in the wrong direction the whole time. And then I looked up on the internet, Celebrate Recovery, and I found this place. And I've been coming ever since. And now it's just this, on a regular basis, I feel this gratitude that just brings me to tears. And I just stay in the Bible. And I just thank God for everything. Because God was never condemning me to hell. I was condemning myself to hell. He was steady trying to save me, and I was steady rejecting him. All right, ending. I wrote a poem. It's a poem about salvation. On an ocean of troubled waters, surrounded by darkness in a pit of despair, I see a light shining on a distant shore. I cry out, Lord my God. Out of the light comes the right hand of God. He takes me in the palm of his hand and sits me on firm ground, basking in the light of his glory. Oh, what a gift of salvation. I'm not exempt from struggles, but nowadays I can learn from my struggles. Every time I overcome struggles through faith, it's like it's a stepping stone. And a lot of people tell me, Jesse, you're going to do great things. And I want to do great things. But I know I can't get an ego about it. I got to stay humble. I can't take credit for the change in my life because I could not change myself. But Jesus, he saved me. He changed me. And that's who I keep my eyes on. That's all I got.